Hello, and welcome to the Yale SOM Exchange webinar, starting with sustainability. Thanks for joining us. The Yale SOM Exchange is the SOM series of online conversations. Series provides alumni and the entire Yale SOM community with opportunities to keep learning about faculty research, current events, and career strategies. I'm Vincent Stanley, Director of Philosophy for Patagonia, and also a resident fellow at the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. And today I'm joined by two esteemed panelists, the co-authors of the Sustainability Scorecard, How to Implement and Profit from Unexpected Solutions. And like a good talk show host, I have actually can produce the book and show it to you. To introduce our panelists, Urvashi Bhatnagar is a healthcare executive whose career spans clinical care research, advocacy, and strategy and operations consulting for leading healthcare operations. She's also a 2017 SOM graduate. She advises clients in the healthcare sector on how to stay ahead of key industry trends, identify opportunities to become more efficient, and strategically innovate how healthcare is accessed and delivered to communities that require it the most. And prior to her work in the US, Urvi led healthcare advocacy and education initiatives related to poliomyelitis and tuberculosis in some of the poorest states in India. She recognizes the global total wellness can only occur by way of sustained, systematic, and intentional investment in social and environmental health. Now, Paul describes himself as a beaker and test tube chemist, but he is known to the rest of us as the father of green chemistry, professor of chemistry here at Yale and director of the university's Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering. During his time at the EPA, 2009 to 12, Paul was their senior science advisor, chief of their industrial chemical branch, and director of the U.S. Green Industry Program. He's the author of numerous articles and books, including one of my favorite titles, Benign by Design, and his seminal work with co-author John Warner, Green Chemistry, Theory and Practice. There is so much, and I think that there's a quick word at the outset of our hour together. We've titled this talk Starting with Sustainability to emphasize that doing the right thing by the health of the human and natural worlds is not a matter of compliance or checking the boxes. It's a matter of innovation strategy, where to start to make the right products in the right way and then keep it rolling. So I'd like to start off a little bit just to ask each of you because you are co-authors and you come from different backgrounds, and how did you come to write the book? I'll start with Urvi.
Yeah, I think I've always recognized that economic well-being or economic progress rather cannot be uncoupled from social and environmental well-being. I was exposed to that actually early on in my career. You mentioned my work with polio and TB. I had the incredible opportunity of interning right after my undergrad studies in a hospital in India, which is really well known for its reconstructive surgeries for post-polio syndrome. And the leader of our department was someone that had been recognized by Bill Gates for his work in the field. And in working with him, I realized that he placed so much emphasis in his treatment protocols for social and environmental factors, as well as health equity. And that was the first time that I started thinking of these concepts as data-driven approaches that would really influence human wellness far beyond their one-time visits with the doctor or their procedures. And of course, in working with Paul and during my MBA, I think that's solidified my approach to be able to communicate with firms about how to innovate their business models.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and Paul?
Well, I have to tip my hat and give my thanks to Urvi, because we were able to work together during her MBA here. And, you know, I had been involved as a simple country chemist doing the science of sustainability over the past decades. And the interactions that Urvi and I had showed that there'd be ways to bring that science, the science of design, the science of understanding the almost infinite interconnectivity of sustainable systems nested in systems, and how to translate those into just simply good business. And so that's what this book is really seeking to do, is how to make the depth of the science, the insights around design, make sense from a business perspective and be able to be readily applicable.
Yeah, well, thank you. You know, I think I can, reading the book, I can bear out your instincts from my experience at Patagonia. And when you refer to systems nested within systems, the more you uncover what goes on in the supply chain, or the deeper you get into the processes and procedures that make up your workflow, the more you discover how what you do touches on so many other people and on so many natural systems or industrial systems. So one of the things I loved about, I've read a lot of books about metrics, but one of the things I loved about your book was that you spoke of the need for a compass rather than a speedometer. And it doesn't mean that the situation isn't urgent and that we don't need to proceed with great speed, though. Andrew Revkin, he's at Columbia and was a science writer for the New York Times for a long time. He had a line I love, which is we need both urgency and patience, because a lot of what we've done in our industrial age over the past 200 years is to rush headlong to make changes to natural systems that then created deep problems. So I think we need to we both need to act quickly, and we need to take a breath. And I think that's what your scorecard also helps people and companies do. But I wanted to ask you if you can just speak a little bit about the compass versus the speedometer, but also how you think finding that compass will also help a company find its North Star. Because the great theme of the book is something very, very well known to us in this space, that the constraints that you place on yourself as a business, not compliance, but the constraints you place in order to do the right thing lead to innovations that radically change the business model, that create new products and draw new customers. So, but finding that North Star is critical, because that keeps you moving forward. So I wanted to just ask you about that compass North Star.
Yeah, I would be happy to talk about that, and I know in this case, and I speak for Urvi, that because we were chatting about this, is that it is not lost on us, and please forgive me, but being having this panel moderated by you, Vin, and all that you've done at Patagonia, talk about North Stars. I mean, well, that is what we're talking about when we say it's not just the quantities and the amounts or things, but it's the nature and the character of what you produce and how you produce it and how things interact. And there is no greater, in some ways, North Star or iconic company than Patagonia. So I want to tip my hat to you, especially, and to Patagonia. So coming to the point of view of the speedometer versus the compass, to state the obvious, if you're going very, very, very fast, is that a good thing? Only if you're heading in the right direction. right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any difference if you're approaching the speed of light. If you're going in the
Yeah.
wrong direction, that's not a good thing. So speed is only valuable in the context of knowing that what you're doing is qualitatively correct, right?
Yeah.
And so then you have to identify what is that that goal that you're shooting for. What is that North Star? And it's interesting because I would suggest that when you look around at so many of the companies that we admire, with Patagonia being near the top of the list and other examples, it's not that we come to this conclusion by quantitative reductionist metrics of performance. It's by, again, the character and nature. And it's something that many privately owned companies, family owned companies that have perspective beyond the next quarterly report understand that it is not enough just simply to have short-term goals and profitability and et cetera. It's something beyond that, and sustainability encapsulates so many of those qualitative goals. I'll turn it over to Urvi.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that a little bit, I'd say that the North Star is really where your corporate strategy comes in. When sustainability is treated as a compliance measure or focus or a marketing campaign, it either gets owned by cost accountants in risk and management or by communications. But what we really need is for departments to work in an interconnected manner. And that can only happen when the organization as a whole has a North Star, a direction that they're moving towards. They may never achieve it. It might be so ambitious that they work for decades to achieve it. But that's exactly the goal, because if firms are to outlive their employees and continue to be relevant into the future, they're going to have to continuously innovate along some values-based directions.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. There's a couple of quick things. I remember when we switched to organic cotton and we couldn't find a spinner to work with us because we had broken our connection to the global supply chain by buying cotton from farmers, and they didn't know spinners. So we go to the spinners and they say, oh, we don't want to work with this. We hate organic cotton. It gums up our machines. And we finally found in Bangkok, one of the largest spinners in the world, largest spinning factories in the world, said, oh, you know what I can do is I can cool the factory floor, and that will enable us to work with the organic cotton. Years later, we asked him, why did you even talk to us? You know, we were so small at the time and you were so big. And he said, well, I guess you could call me a closet environmentalist. and I think that Paul was talking about character, but is also values. And I think values are the most underrated driver in business because it's silent. Nobody wants to say, I'm doing this because it's the right thing. You want to say, because it's going to create a profit for the company. But it's kind of a lost opportunity, because the other quote I would give you that Yvon has said time and again, scratching his head, Yvon Chouinard, saying, every time I do the right thing, I make money.
Yes.
And that's because the innovations then connect to customers in the larger community, and also connect your designers to possibilities they wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Right.
If you there's one of the points you made is that if you pursue efficiencies without looking at their impacts, they cease to be efficiencies. And I was wondering if you could you talk about the kind of four key elements to the scorecard of waste prevention, maximizing efficiency and performance, which And Urvi, we've talked about this, you make a strong connection between performance and human health, which I think is really key. Can you, and then the third element is using renewable inputs, which is important. And then the fourth is safe degradation, the whole waste issue that we're facing on the planet. And I was just wondering, can you talk a little bit about how you came up with these four as kind of the key elements that will help a company find its North Star by looking at the impacts in those four areas?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll let Paul go first.
All right. So the long story that I'll shorten is when we talk about these decades of sustainability science that people have been doing. There are 12 principles of green chemistry and 12 principles of green engineering, and we really wanted to distill these down into the essence of what it is that makes something move toward greater sustainability. And the essence of it, we recognize that you look outside and take a walk in the woods, you recognize that nature doesn't say, oh, the only way I'm going to be sustainable is to do less, expect less, consume less, and have less. It's not about what you minimize, ban, control.
Yeah.
It's about, again, coming back to this idea. Are the things that you are making and how you're making them conducive to life?
Yeah.
Writ large.
Yeah.
And so the essence of these four areas is, how do you make what we do conducive to life now and in the future? So in nature, there is no waste, of course. This is something that, anytime a waste is generated, an organism evolves to turn it into a feedstock. When we're talking about efficiency and performance, it really is talking about redeveloping the whole definition of performance. So it's not just accomplishing a narrow function of a glue or a paint or whatever. It's about making sure that it accomplishes that function and that it's also being helpful to humans and the biosphere that supports us, right? We're talking about making sure things are renewable. It's that doing that in a human time frame. We talk in the book about doing the right things wrong. And so we want to think about making sure that when we talk about renewable, it's on a very relevant time frame and not doing the right things wrong by saying things like, well, panda tears are renewable, and so therefore we're going to no, we don't want to. And then, of course, ultimately, even as we pursue circularity where it makes sense, ultimately it needs to be able to go back into the earth. So I went on and on, but Urvi, what would you add?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. To touch upon Vincent's question about redefining performance and quality, our second principle, I think the public health and wellness angle has been overlooked in mainstream dialogue, and also in the way we construct our products and processes in organizations. We somehow we focus on the human element when it relates to HR, but sort of forget about it as it relates to product design and process design, and even corporate strategy. And so what I would say is that, and I know Paul and I have discussed this often, is if you're using any product, cosmetics, paints, what have you, as a byproduct, if they perform their job, but they also, their exposure to them causes cancer or, has all of these negative externalities, the product is no longer high performing. And in healthcare, what we would call that is a poor outcome, or something that wasn't able to deliver value-based care. You were simply able to eliminate the need, but you weren't able to prolong life or add life to the years. You just achieved either going from point A to point B, if we're talking about fuel, or other applications.
Yeah.
So I think what organizations should focus on more is actually evaluating their products in the very beginning. So when we think about waste prevention, that's where when you have 70 to 80% of your budget allocated in the design phase, that's when we should be thinking about waste prevention, and how things can be, how we can either eliminate waste or prevent it from going into the graveyard. And if it's going into the graveyard, then can it degrade safely? And that again has a human health element. And so all of these pieces need to tie together. And that results in the redefinition of performance and quality.
Yeah, thank you. You know, at Patagonia, we came to this from another angle, but ended up in the same place, which was that our definition of quality includes environmental performance and how does it affect the planet and natural systems. What we've been obviously learning over the past decade is how inextricable human health and planetary health are. So, you know, we've come around to what you're saying from the side door, but I think one of the things that really interests me about what you're both speaking about is you're dealing with a major social political problem of what we call externalities that everybody at SOM will know about. But you're actually getting companies to address externalities from their own home base, from what they know about and what they produce. And I think this is the way to do it. Again, it's not a question of cost accounting. It's if you have this definition of quality, then you're not, and you attach a cost to each of these four areas that you're talking about. You have to actually deal with what traditionally we've socialized the costs and privatized the profits. So, one of my favorite phrases in the book is unexpected solutions, and I was wondering if you could talk about that, Urvi. I bet Paul would want you to take the lead on that.
Yeah, certainly. So we find that globally leaders are hesitant to invest in sustainable products and processes. Very often the question is, the business case for why is closed. We all understand the benefits, but how? And they often point to embedded capital, whether it's human capital or financial, to say, well, uprooting a certain process or redefining the way we do things in a certain area would be cost prohibitive. And so the reason why we wanted to focus on unexpected solutions is that when we reframe how we look at the problem statement, and for example, it could be tactically thinking about it from a waste prevention standpoint. If you're only focusing on one principle and you're thinking about that in the design phase, you're going to uncover so many benefits and realize additional areas where value can be praised and revenue can be generated along your value chain, that it would only make sense to innovate your process, even if there is a inherent cost in redoing your process and uprooting it from the way that it has traditionally occurred.
Right. This is such a key point. I'm wondering if you can, or if either of you can give us an example that illustrates this principle.
Well, I'll start with one. You know, and it comes from exactly what we're discussing, that when we talk about sustainability, and one of the things that you mentioned earlier, Vin, was that we figure out that everything is connected to everything else, as John Muir once pointed out to us, right? And when we realize that, what is the end there for? What is it that you then conclude? That our normal ways of doing reductionist analyses and unit process optimization is going to be the best way? No, it tells you that there are synergies and interconnections to take advantage of. So one of the examples is there's a company called Core Infrastructure that mainly operates on the West Coast. But it has a large facility at the Los Angeles waste treatment facility. And what it does is it takes a lot of the sludge, the sewage sludge, puts it through its process, and the resulting product is power or fuel, depending on how you want to optimize, and pure water. And so you ask yourself, oh, so that's a waste technology. Oh, wait. Or it's an energy technology. Oh, wait, it's a water technology.
Right.
And of course, the answer is it's an all three technology. And so when we talk about the food, energy, water, climate nexus, and we can go beyond that, that is saying, if you think differently around design, that's where these unexpected solutions will come from.
Yeah. And I think for the SOM students and recent graduates, this is an area to really think about, is the potential for companies to act cooperatively when you come up with a business that provides an energy, a water, and a waste solution. Not every company can deal with all three or four of those, but there are other companies who can, that you can work with cooperatively. So
yeah, exactly.
The other one of the other ideas in the book that I found really intriguing was talking about closed loop solutions based on nexus thinking, and that's exactly, I think, what we just touched on. But I was wondering if you how this might touch on some of Marion Chertow's work in industrial ecology, or the Kate Raworth idea of not just donut economics, but actually put to the test in trying to create these integral industries in Amsterdam. And I just put that idea out and see if either of you have an interest in this, or something you'd like to talk about.
Yeah, Urvashi, would you like to start, or?
Actually, I was going to suggest if you would like to go first.
Sure. So I'm so glad that you mentioned Professor Chertow's work and the Center for Industrial Ecology, and it was founded by Tom Gradle right here at Yale, because I really refer to industrial ecology as the science of the circular economy. So this has been around, and it really shows how you get this interconnectivity, this mimicking of nature, and how you interconnect these processes. So we've seen this big push on understanding toward a circular economy and interconnecting, so that maybe you have a particular waste plastic or a waste metal that can be reprocessed and used in cycles rather than the usual linear processes. And I think that is an elegant model that can work well in so many situations. What I think is equally, and I'll stress this, equally important to recognize, is that it's not going to work well in every situation, and it needs to be done thoughtfully, and it needs to be done through design. Merely hitching unsustainable industry sectors together in a loop is not enough to make them sustainable. You have tremendous material and energy costs for the separation, purification, and isolation. We recognize that the materials and energy that we use currently are not optimal from a sustainability perspective. So preserving those by saying they will just cycle them around over and over again, does not make them sustainable. So we have to think about the correct way to design these things in order to optimize, around sustainability and, quite frankly, long-term, profitability.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Urvashi, anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are various examples of in nature, as Paul just mentioned, and it has to be thoughtfully designed, of course. But I would say that I would encourage people to be creative and look to those answers in nature. For example, there's a wonderful use case of how Chobani tried to redesign their cup to be to degrade safely, yet withstand impact while it was in transit. And so this, among others, whether you're thinking about refurbished medical devices and you're trying, and that's a more system level example, where you're closing the loop on an entire process versus redesigning a product. But pointing back to Paul's guidance on thinking about this safely, because merely stitching together various sectors will not answer the question.
Yeah, okay. Four wrongs won't make a right.
That's right. And I just add that, you know, the Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering is all about designing those next generation materials and energy sources so that we're able to, you know, weave in these new sustainable approaches into the cycles, into the circular economy, so that you're really moving forward.
All right. I'd like to remind our viewers and listeners that we're going to have a section on in which you have a chance to ask questions of Paul and Urvi, and you can put them into the chat box, and we'll get to those in a few minutes.
Vin, I think they go into the Q&A box.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for raising that. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. But the reminder still holds for the Q&A box. Okay. You know, you just touched on the mission of the Green Chemistry, Green Engineering Center, and I was wondering if you might talk about some products that are emerging from green chemistry that can be big changers.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. There's so many, you know, as we all know, that we live in a petroleum-based society for the past, let's call it close to 200 years. And that part of the transition we need to go to is to a bio-based society. And in order to do that, we need to invent this next generation of materials and energy. And so the integrated biorefinery is one of the big projects that takes place, and that's generating, you know, new plastics that are not just, you know, it's not just about recycling the same old polyethylene. This is about how you start from, you know, sustainable materials, go through sustainable manufacturing, and make sure that at the end of life, it's also going to be, again, life conducive. So these new materials that we're doing, whether it's using, nuts like this, candle nuts, to transform those. But also we have to learn the lesson of the petroleum refinery. The petroleum refinery is a miracle of technology in terms of getting value from each distillation fraction. Now, for the past 20, 30 years, the way that we've approached biofuels is about, oh, well, let's make some biodiesel and, you know, count on government subsidies to make the business case. Taking the model of how do you get value from every little fraction of that bio-based feedstock is something that we're also working on. And of course, yes, we're working on things like how do you transform CO2? You know, the great grand vision that we're working on is how do we make things out of thin air? So the vast majority of every material that we have is made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Last I checked, that's the same components as we have in air. So when we split water vapor in the air into hydrogen and oxygen, and we combine that hydrogen with CO2, we're able to make a tremendous number of, you know, building blocks that can be used in everything from fuels aviation fuels to materials. And so that's the great grand vision.
All right, thank you. Urvi, what applications would you see in the medical world for this kind of work?
There are numerous, but I would say there's some incredible work going on at Yale related to green anesthesia. And of course, much of Paul's world relates to cosmetics as well. And I consider every firm a healthcare firm. If you are thinking about risk and exposure, your daily exposure to toxic chemicals is significant. And so green anesthesia presents many benefits over traditional chemicals because of the wake up time and patient outcomes and reduced total cost of care. It is better from a values-based perspective, but it just makes business sense. Why would you do it any other way? Of course, this hasn't been generalized across all chemicals yet, but I think that's where the work needs to occur further, is to see how we can produce more anesthetic components that can achieve better outcomes for patients. And like that, there are several examples in healthcare from medical devices and so on that are very promising.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask, there's an element in the book which I think is important. We've touched on the and I know Todd Court deals with this question in his classes. We've touched on the issue of what are the metrics for? I mean, metrics don't drive sustainability, they measure it. And but it's become so confusing for companies that now the conversation has kind of focused on that. And your scorecard, because I think people can think that this is the development of a kind of alternative system to SASB or something like that, but you're really dealing with something different. And I was wondering if you could address a little bit about kind of key point in the book about companies at different stages of their development and their sustainability work, from those that are brand new to those that are developing and those are more mature. If you could just talk a little bit about the role of that idea in the book, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. I'll actually point back to our conversation around the North Star for this and say that as it relates to corporate strategy, the board and leaders should always keep their eye on where they're heading, and therefore over-indexing on metrics that at the end of the day just point back on efficiency or number of widgets produced per hour, some fashion of that, is ultimately not helpful, because they're not giving you a great deal of information on your direction. And so therefore, when we think about metrics, and this scorecard in particular, we've intentionally designed it to be flexible and to allow it to be incorporated by leaders in various industries, such that they can track KPIs that are more meaningful for them. Yet it provides them a common language to compare and contrast and understand how they might be able to collaborate with each other, and how each other's industries are performing as it relates to achieving that North Star goal. And so to that end, when we think about where we're heading, then we conceived of a maturity model and thought about it in the categories of initiate, develop, and mature, to say, firms that are just starting on their sustainability journey have initiated it, and that's the first step. That's incredibly important. And as you take incremental steps forward, for example, firms that have just started their sustainability journey, you'll notice that their boards put out ambitious messages saying we are going to achieve ABC by 2050. We're going to take certain actions. We're going to be investing in ABC. However, we don't see that system level change occurring. We don't see investments yet in completely sustainable products or processes, or trying to or leveraging pilots that would uproot embedded systems. That's something you would see more from a develop firm, where the top-down messaging is is coupled with bottom-up action. And mature firms align with a quote unquote perfect scorecard, because as a society and as a business, we're all so focused on achieving 100% on every test, on every KPI, at the end of every quarter or every year. And in this book, we've intentionally designed the scorecard and the maturity model to say that you may never reach 100%. And that's actually the goal, because there will be knowledge gaps. You might have a discovery in the future and you realize your existing process that you thought was creating a completely sustainable process actually has some gaps. And so therefore, it fosters the culture of continuous innovation, continuous improvement.
Yeah, and that's really so key. And going back to the idea of systems nested within systems, the more you go down this path, the more you learn, and then the more you learn, the more it changes what you know you need to do. There's an interesting, I think one of the discoveries we made fairly on that was very sobering for us at Patagonia is that almost anything we did as a business, and we think probably still in almost any business, is that you're taking more from the planet than you're giving back. And you can extend that. We're also in business taking more from human communities in a lot of instances than we're giving back. And one of the things that's really shifted us, because we went in a very small way into the food business, and the idea of rebuilding soil, the health of soil, which then needs less water, fewer inputs, even if they're natural chemicals, and then creates the capacity to sequester carbon. What you're doing there is you're actually giving back to the planet as much as you're taking. And I think that has affected us quite a lot, because that has shifted our North Star from just reducing the harm we do to, okay, how is it that we can actually give back, regenerate, restore? And I think that that touches on the scorecard. There's no, the star is moving. So, I wanted to, kind of one last question before we go into questions from our folks. And this one is for Paul. And I'd like, wondering if you might speak a little bit to jet fuel on the rocks.
I'd be happy to. So there is this wonderful little journey that I want to highlight the work of a Yale alum, Staff Sheehan, who was lucky enough to work with when he was a student here. And I mentioned this idea about water splitting and coupling that with reacting the hydrogen with CO2. Well, we formed a little company, and make a long story short, over years, developed this way of making ethanol that is now the world's first carbon negative vodka. Now, this is an award-winning luxury vodka that people step back and say, hold it. All the vodka in the world isn't going to scratch the surface of the climate change problem. And, we often say, no, it's about capturing people's imaginations. And so if you can show people that you can make a luxury vodka by using CO2, make it carbon negative, then it becomes easier for them to imagine that you can make all kinds of other things. And there was the announcement last week at the facility of the Air Company at Brooklyn that the first commercially available sustainable aviation fuel from CO2 using this process, carbon neutral sustainable aviation fuel, was being released with JetBlue and Virgin Atlantic using the fuel that's produced initially. So that is something that we're very, very excited about.
Yeah, with good reason. Yeah, thank you. All right. I'd like to go to the Q&A and see what we have. Well, here's an interesting question from Ivan. How would you define sustainability, and would you tie it to UN Sustainable Development Goals, or do you have an independent reading of it?
I'm happy to let you lead if you'd like to, Urvi.
Sure. Absolutely. I would define sustainability as all-encompassing of the triple bottom line. I think it has the four basic tenets of, waste prevention, redefining performance and quality, or rather maximizing performance and quality by redefining it, safe degradation, and using renewable resources. So I think these are the four principles of sustainability, and they directly tie into the triple bottom line. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are extremely important. And yes, there's definitely a connection that I see. By way of the triple bottom line, I think for-profit firms and nonprofit firms can take very direct steps towards impacting the UN Sustainable Development Goals in all markets. Some of the examples that Paul just provided are very impactful and definitely demonstrate how sustained investment in such products can actually create wealth, human health, wealth of human health and environmental health.
Thank you.
I guess I'd just add, since it's such a rich question, I guess I'd just add, we have the traditional definition of being able to meet the needs of the current generation while preserving the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And that's a very useful definition. I guess I'd say a couple of things. One, when I hear people talking about the three legs of the stool of environment, society, and the economy, I kind of blanch at that, because it gives this false equivalency, as if all three are equal. And of course they're not. I mean, the economy, no matter what economy, exists to serve the needs of society, and society is not possible without what's provided by the environment. So there's certainly, you could say that they're nested, but you certainly can't say that they're equal. So I guess if I had my own perspective on sustainability, I'd say practices conducive to life. Mm-hmm. And what that just necessarily requires is that we absolutely must take care of humanity, the biosphere, and the geosphere that supports it, because otherwise life's not going to be preserved.
Thank you. I think one of the things that Patagonia is kind of, we don't like the word sustainability, because the implication is that we are somehow sustainable, and we know that most of what we do is not. So we've abjured the word, but I think that what you two are doing is pointing to a kind of a different sense of that word, and sustainability not as just kind of treading water and not doing any more harm than we've already done, but the idea of a kind of sustained effort to actually bring about these practices conducive to life.
Yeah.
There's one, I'm a social, this is from Leilani. I'm a sociological researcher on consumer behaviors and citizen roles. Can you talk about the place of citizens in pushing toward sustainability in products supply consumption chain?
Absolutely. The role of citizens is incredibly important, but I think the researcher probably knows better than I do that the voice of the consumer has never been louder in today's economy. And I will say, though, I think in some sectors, the voice of the consumer is louder than others. for example, in cosmetics, if you wanted to understand which chemicals to avoid the next time you go out and buy any product from shampoo to cosmetics, I'm quite sure you could Google your way through it and come up with, you know, the best products in the market that would suit your skin type or your hair type. But in some markets like healthcare, we cannot rely on the consumer or the patient to tell us what they want. For example, in healthcare, there needs to be greater patient awareness and greater patient access and activation in order for them to be able to articulate what they require and for us to be able to understand it and meaningfully develop a solution. And therefore, I think in some markets, the onus is on the leaders to design for the future. And how you design for the future is by following these principles and redesigning where that value is placed.
Oh.
If I could just add to that, I completely agree. You know, the famous quote from Einstein that we've all heard, problems can't be solved at the same level of awareness that created them. And we need, right now, generally, I would say people aren't even aware of what's possible in terms of, you know, moving to new ways, not only products and manufacturing process, but the choices available to them. I can't say strongly enough how important I think the recent action by Patagonia is. I could hear echoes of people saying, you can do that? Well, yes, you can do that. And you can tell us about how up until recently it wasn't easy in this country, but looking at things differently, taking a different perspective and understanding what's possible today, I think is crucial.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really required is a level of transparency among businesses when they're talking about what they are determining at the design stage. And I think that's where consumers come in. Then if they have the information, if the information is available and it actually enriches the conversation or the debate, then consumers will be pressuring companies to make their changes, and companies will be pressuring the government. There's an interesting question here from Rosella. Are there any solutions in sight that can address the existing voluminous plastic resins already produced and polluting the environment? I think we have over 6 billion tons of plastic waste still on the planet, and 4 billion of those are out of circulation. So any thoughts on?
Should I start, Irving?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I got to admit, I love this one because we've got a lot of work going on in our laboratories on this kind of thing. And but the more important part is that there are many laboratories developing ways of taking, for instance, old polyethylene that's going to persist for millennia and converting it into something that is useful and biodegradable. And converting it in ways that sequester CO2. There's a wonderful example of, you know, not in the future, but that can be done today, where John Warner of the Warner Babcock Institute worked with Adidas to take fishing nets and turn them into the Parley running shoes, and that's something that can be done. So all across the spectrum of what you can do today, what's in the near term, what's in the longer term. The key is to know that none of this is science fiction. All of this is possible. And what it takes is attention and investment and support.
Right, thank you.
Actually, I have a question I'd like to follow up on that, Paul. Some of those examples that you described relate a little bit more to upcycling, which is certainly progress. But have you seen any innovations that will allow for safe degradation of plastics or be able to scale that meaningfully?
I am thrilled to say that we're involved in a consortium with the Biomimicry Institute and the Lourdes Foundation around exactly that. So how do you control degradation? So yes, biodegradation, but also degradation on command for when you want to trigger it for the circular economy. And so there's a lot of work, a lot of thought that's and a lot of great advances that are being done in exactly that area.
All right. And we've also got the potential perhaps of plastic, of mushrooms that want to eat plastic, and that would that could help us. So
Yes,
anyway.
there's a local interest that's looking at enzymes, PEI here in New Haven, looking at how you convert established PET, and you're able to degrade it and put it into new products. So I tip my hat to them too.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for this conversation. And thank you very much for your work and for writing this book. And thank everybody for being here today. And for joining this Yale SOM Exchange webinar. Please keep an eye out for future webinars hosted by the school. And you can visit som.yale.edu/alumni to see upcoming events. And with that, I would like to again thank you and thank everybody who has attended, and Kayla for keeping us on track with the technology and the schedule.
Thank you so much, Vin. It's been an honor.
It's been an honor for me. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right.